Hey guys, Atticus here with HabitatForSurvival.com. Welcome to the jungle. Welcome to my channel, where I talk about lots of Latter-day Prophecy, crazy things, And with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Nephilim, aliens, and Bigfoots. Yeah, that's where we're going with this. And Groots. Well, no, we're not going to talk about Groots. I wish we could talk about Groots. But no, we're going to stick with Nephilim and aliens and Bigfoots. There is a scriptural explanation for both of these phenomena. Full disclosure, if the current me could go back in time and travel to visit past me and explain how the Bible speaks of aliens and sasquatches, past me would probably be very concerned about current me. So if you don't believe these things, I don't blame you. But I've come to believe this through serious scripture study, and because scripturally I cannot answer certain verses in the Bible any other way. Just certain things don't make sense to me unless I have this understanding that I'm going to present to you. So with that, let's talk about aliens and Bigfoots. So, first slide. Here says, what is a watcher? So let's look at an odd thing Daniel said in one of the visions he was interpreting for Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel 4:13, it reads, I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven. What the heck is a watcher? The canonical version of the Bible doesn't explain this any further. It's as if Daniel just expects us to know what a watcher is, like he thinks that we should. And if we studied some of the same records he did, I'm sure we'd know what a watcher is. So let's look at some odd verses in the book of Genesis that seem to suggest an odd, unprecedented event took place in our past that changed everything in that time. So Genesis 6:2, it says, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives, all of which they chose. So in the past, when I read Genesis and thought this was an odd verse, I couldn't quite understand it. I figured it was speaking to general apostasy, how good people can sometimes marry people that are not of their faith, and then their children don't grow up with the same faith and understanding their father or mother had. However, that train of thought seems odd because it says sons of God and daughters of men. Is it saying a bunch of worldly women were married by righteous men? That might be the case. As men, we often prioritize certain physical features of a woman, for higher value than what they're worth. But if you're a somewhat righteous man, or even not righteous, but have a decent functioning analytical mind as a man, you'll still consider the craziness factor of women. Sorry, someone's going to get offended. All these feminists are going to come after me. But yeah, as a man, you always consider this. It's no hidden fact. You'll consider, is she capable of remaining faithful to you? How will she spend your hard-earned money? Because you don't like to work 60, 70 hours a week. It's not that fun. And how will she raise your kids? And if you didn't consider these things, how righteous were you? Could you really have the title Son of God? And could you really have a bunch of unrighteous women but righteous men that end up intermarrying? It seems like an odd statistical anomaly. I would think apostasy would consist of both sexes becoming unrighteous. But let's look at another odd verse, Genesis 5:1. It says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Well, what else could it be about? Seriously, it seems like a stupid statement. It says, what other generations are there to consider? If Adam was the first created by God, don't all the generations come from him? Unless another bloodline somehow came into play, then this statement makes sense. So Genesis 6:4 says, There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, and the same became mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So when I first read this, I thought it was odd to just state something to the effect of, oh yeah, there was this bloodline that created really tall people. The end. And that's how I think most Christians understand that verse in Genesis. See, there is much more to the story than that. The first chapters of Genesis is an incredibly small record to cover thousands of years. So from verse 4, we know that the offspring that resulted from the sons of God and daughters of men equaled giants. But why tell us this? What does this matter? Let's go back to the previous slide. Let's look at some other translations of Genesis 6:2 to see if we can get a better understanding. So, the New American Bible reads a little different. Instead of saying the sons of God, it says the sons of heaven. And a couple other translations use this term of sons of heaven instead of sons of God. So you could easily imagine the easy slip in translation. We think of God as the ruler of the heaven and could easily think Son of God and Son of Heaven as synonymous. But a son of heaven just means you originated from somewhere above the earth. It doesn't necessarily mean you're of God or worthy to be called by his name. Several other translations of the Bible also add an extra line to the beginning of this verse. It says, "The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children unto them." So, the Nephilim is a word that's used in the Bible only to describe the origin of these giants. The word is believed to come from the ancient Hebrew root word of nephal, N-P-L, which means to fall. That is how Hebrews wrote some of their old words. They leave out the vowels and you'd fill them in. Could it be that these giants were the offspring that resulted from the union of women with extraterrestrial beings, fallen beings? In the Apocrypha, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees explains this story further. So, the Book of Enoch chapter 7 first mentions the extraterrestrial beings called Watchers. It doesn't explain why they were given that name, but we can make an educated guess from reading the content. It appears from the record that these extraterrestrial beings didn't immediately marry women right away when they first arrived. In fact, we learned they were really afraid to do so because they knew God would be angry with them. So, what did they do? Well, at first they just simply observed. They just watched. Similar to how UFOs today, just watching. We read about this in chapter 7. It says the Watchers had a leader named Samyaza. Samyaza tells his fellow brethren, who are in total 200, that he wants to choose some of the women of earth to be his wives. But he's afraid of doing so because the crime is so severe. He knows Elohim is not going to like this. His fellow watchers decide that they will make an oath altogether, that they will do the same as their leader desires, and that they will all take wives of their choosing. So Enoch 7:7 says, "Then they swore all together, and all bound themselves by mutual execrations. Their whole number was 200, who descended upon Mount Ardus, which is the top of Mount Armon." So somehow these extraterrestrial beings thought that if they were all guilty of the same crime together, that the punishment would be less severe than if only one of them were guilty. So the below verses explain what the initial offspring were like in Enoch 7:10. It says, "Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of roots and trees. And the women conceiving brought forth giants. whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all which the labor of men produced, until it became impossible to feed them, and when they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fishes, to eat their flesh one after another, and to drink their blood, then the earth reproved the unrighteous. Even though these giants were much larger and stronger than their human counterparts, they had difficulty surviving in large numbers because they would consume all the nearby resources. So another thing that we learn about their offspring is that they were not possessed of spirits sent from heaven, but spirits imprisoned on this earth. In other words, demons. Enoch 15:8 reads as follows: Now the giants who have been born of spirit and of flesh shall be called upon earth evil spirits, and on earth shall be their habitation. Evil spirits shall proceed from their flesh, because they were created from above. From the holy watchers was their beginning and primary foundation. Evil spirits shall they be upon earth, and the spirits of the wicked shall they be called. The habitation of the spirits of heaven shall be in heaven, but upon earth shall be the habitation of terrestrial spirits who are born on earth. So in other words, the spirits that would inhabit the bodies created by the union of these women and the watchers would be spirits from Satan's realm, demons. Remember, in heaven a war was fought, and Lucifer and his followers were cast down to earth, and they were imprisoned here. So when a woman is pregnant, she creates a body for a child, but the spirit comes from heaven to inhabit that body. The watchers must have supposed it would work the same way for them, but God did not allow it to work the same way for them. He would not allow the spirits of heaven to enter these offspring. So, next slide. The watchers teach men. So another thing the watchers did was they brought with them all their superior intellect, technology, and understanding of the universe. Chapter 8 of Enoch states they taught men how to make swords, shields, ornaments, paint, use of stones, dyes, etc., so that the world became altered, is what it says. In other words, they taught so much technology to people that the world was not the same. They also taught sorcerers, astronomy, physics, and the dividers of roots, whatever that means. No idea. But they also perverted religion. It says that impiety increased along with fornication, so did murder, and that the watchers transgressed and corrupted all their ways. In addition, Enoch 9:5 states that they had disclosed to the world all the secret things which are done in the heavens. So there was knowledge they disclosed to people that the Lord didn't want mankind to have at that time. Or maybe he just wanted mankind to make discoveries themselves. Verse 9, it says, And men being destroyed cried out, and their voice reached heaven. Alright, so how the Almighty responds to the watchers. So if you haven't read my post or watched my presentation about Zion, then I encourage you to do so. It explains who Enoch was and why he is involved in this exchange between God and the watchers. See, Enoch at this period in history is God's high priest, holding all the rights and powers of the priesthood. He has communication with God and his power, and he has established a nation which he calls Zion. The watchers and their giant offspring are no match for the strength of Zion. In Enoch 12:5-7, the Lord talks with Enoch and gives a message for him to pass along to the watchers. So then the Lord said to me, Enoch, scribe of righteousness, go tell the watchers of heaven, who have deserted the lofty sky and their holy everlasting station, who have been polluted with women, and have done as the sons of men do by taking to themselves wives, and who have been greatly corrupted on earth, that on the earth they shall never obtain peace and remission of sin, for they shall not rejoice in their offspring. They shall behold the slaughter of their beloved, shall lament for the destruction of their sons, and shall petition forever, but shall not obtain mercy and peace. So one of the things we learn from this verse is that the watchers had deserted whatever habitat in the universe that the Lord had created for them, and it appears that they weren't even supposed to be on earth in the first place. Since there was no immediate reaction from the Lord due to this trespass, we might suppose that this sin could have been forgiven. But their coming to earth and having intercourse with women wasn't forgivable. The canonical book of Jude 1:6 also reaffirms this historic truth. It says, "The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day." So, as you might imagine, when the watchers get this news from the great Elohim, it is more than they can bear. They beseech Enoch to write for them a memorial of supplication that they might obtain forgiveness, because at this time the watchers are afraid to address the Almighty themselves through prayer because of their great offense and accompanying fear and shame. So Enoch takes the watchers' request to the Lord, and his response to the watchers is the same as before, with a few additional insights into their relationship with the Lord. Enoch 15:1 states, this is coming from Enoch, from the Lord to the watchers, says, "You ought to pray for men, and not men for you." In other words, beings of the heavens ought to have their focus on serving men, and not the other way around. Verse 3, he says, "You being spiritual, holy, and possessing a life which is eternal, have polluted yourselves with women, and have begotten in carnal blood, have lusted in the blood of men, and have done as those who are flesh and blood do. These, however, die and perish. Therefore I have given to them wives, that they might cohabit with them, that sons might be born of them, and that this might be transacted upon the earth. But you from the beginning were made spiritual, possess a life which is eternal, and not subject to death forever. Therefore I made not wives for you, because being spiritual, your dwelling is in heaven." So from these verses we learn that the watchers had bodies much different than our mortal bodies. Their bodies were eternal in nature. They're not subject to death, at least not in a normal way. Later you'll learn that the Lord is quite capable of destroying them or binding them, as we'll read. Because they had eternal bodies, they were not given wives or offspring. It either wasn't in the cards for them, because let's face it, they didn't really turn out to be great parents. They basically wrecked the entire planet. Or if they were to have offspring, it would have happened at some later point in the eternities. Next slide here. So, in summary, what happens to the watchers? The Lord sends some archangels, Michael to announce their punishment, Raphael, who binds the watchers' leader Samyaza to await judgment day, and Gabriel, who excites the offspring of the watchers against each other until they start slaughtering each other. The Lord is also going to flood the earth to destroy mankind who have gone wicked, as well as the watchers and their offspring. The archangels were able to bind the watchers on earth so they could not leave the earth. The watchers are directly responsible for the flood. Some additional insight. Reading over this story, I can't help but get the feeling that the watchers also wanted to be worshipped as gods. For example, we know that the watchers were quite well aware of Elohim, and it appears that he was their creator, but despite this, they perverted religion. Chapter 19, verse 2 of Enoch says the following about the watchers. It says, "And being numerous in appearance, made men profane and caused them to err, so that they sacrificed to devils as to gods. For in the great day there shall be a judgment, which they shall be judged, until they are consumed, and their wives also shall be judged, who led astray the angels of heaven, that they might salute them." So, why is this story important? We'll be getting to that a little later. I want to keep this story going in a chronological order, but later we're going to look at some verses that suggest in the latter days watchers may have a brief visit to the earth. In fact, some of the attributes of the Antichrist make me suspicious that he'll be a watcher. Why would new watchers have any motivation to return? I have no idea, but the Lord knows their motivation, and he has informed some of his holy prophets to prophesy about it. So if you struggle to believe the story, consider watching a series on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens. I've only watched a handful of episodes of this series, but many archaeologists in this documentary series seem to claim the evidence for aliens visiting humans in the past. Not right in your face, but they say subtly the evidence shows up in certain structures and things that can only be explained by the influence of extraterrestrial beings. There are some ancient structures that our own modern technology is not even capable of building to this day. So, near where I live, there is a Bigfoot museum. When I first went to this museum, I just thought, oh, this is going to be boring. I thought, yeah, it's going to be all bullcrap. However, it is a great museum because at the end you think, okay, maybe there's something to this. There are literally over 1,000 foot molds of Bigfoot, big feet, whatever you want to call it, that have been found on the earth of these giant men that were anywhere from 9 to 14 feet tall. There are even a few bones that have been found. Is this evidence of watcher offspring that used to exist? Alright, so giants after the flood. So where did we leave off? We left off with the watchers were bound by the archangels. The giants killed each other. The rest died in the flood, along with most of mankind that had become wicked. And then, just to clarify this, 1 Peter 3:20 states, "And when once the long-suffering of God awaited in the days of Noah, while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water." Alright, so why in the heck, when we start reading the canonical version of the Bible, do we start to read about giants again in the days of Abraham? The book of Jubilees also talks about a battle between Esau and Jacob's family, where Esau's family had recruited a few giants. Then we read about them again as Moses leads the children of Israel back to the Promised Land. Lastly, in the time of King David, we read about Goliath of Gath, who was somewhere around 7 to 9 feet tall. So the disputes result from variances of the measure of a cubit, because that varied a little bit between cultures, and there's a little bit variation of the recording of the cubit on different records. Interestingly, when compared to King Og, whose iron bed was somewhere around 14.5 feet in length, Goliath is a smaller giant. So what happened? Were these new giants not Watcher bloodline, just really tall people, or were they the same offspring of the Watchers? Was there another migration of Watchers to the earth? I mean, what happened? So the Bible and even the apocryphal writings, to my understanding, are silent on this answer. However, with some additional scriptures and pondering over the substances of certain verses, I have come to make an educated guess as to what took place. So, we first read in the book of Genesis 14 about a big war that's taking place with the League of Nations. Several nations drawing upon their alliances. And this is where we first hear about giants after the flood, at least when you read in the Bible chapter to chapter. So here's the breakdown. We got League of Nations 1 with the kings of Shinar, Elasar, Elam, and title King of Nations. And then you have League versus League of Nations 2, which is the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboiam, and Bela. The explanation of why this war happened is very brief. Apparently, some or all of the people on the League of Nations 2 side were serving the king of Elam for 12 years. After 12 years, they had had enough and rebelled. and this caused a war. So League of Nations 1 starts fighting and bring in the beat down on League of Nations 2. League of Nations 2 actually has giants on their side. Verse 5 talks about them, saying some of these known giants, it reads that they smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Sheva, Kiriathaim. I'm slaughtering probably all the pronunciation on this. And the Horites in Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. So these verses continue to state they beat down other inhabitants aligned with League of Nations 2. But you need to realize that Rephaim, Zuzians, Emims, and Horites are all giant people. This war continues with League of Nations 1, continuing to give the beat down to League of Nations 2. Many of the kings and nobles of Sodom and Gomorrah are killed in the valley of Siddim, and the remaining flee. After Sodom and Gomorrah are beaten back, League of Nations 2 makes their way over towards Lot's estate, and they capture Lot. Someone from Lot's estate escapes to inform Abraham that Lot has been captured. From this, we learn that Abraham is actually confederate with the giants. Perhaps not directly, but at least indirectly, because Abraham is in alliance with Mamre the Amorite, who is in the league 2 with the giants. So Abraham, being an awesome uncle, arms all his servants and a small little force of 318 people. They go forth and they just bring the beat down and beat the bejesus out of at least part of the League of Nations 1, because he rescues Lot and those of his estate and restores them. We don't know how much damage Abraham's force did, but it was substantial enough to make the opposing army retreat and change the course of the war, because later the king of Elam, Chorlaomer, is killed. This king was the main reason for the war, because he took issue with League of One not serving him. In fact, Abraham's fame spreads after this battle, because you hear of Melchizedek, who was a high priest of God and a king of Salem, who came to bless Abraham after hearing of Abraham's great valor and bravery. The Israelites and the giants. So the next time we read about the giants in the Canonical Bible is in Numbers 13. In this story, Moses had sent 12 people to go and spy out the land. 10 of the people that return come back and give an evil report, telling the camp of Israel not to go into the land, that they cannot possess it. Joshua and Caleb are the only two that have faith to go in and inhabit the land the Lord has commanded them to go and possess. The other 10 men spoke against Caleb and Joshua and said the following verses in 31 through 33. It says, "And we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there were giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." So what happens next is these 10 men persuade the camp of Israel to go back to Egypt and seek Pharaoh's grace. So think about that for a second. Think about that. These Israelites were ready to return to slavery, despite all the miracles the Lord had performed for them through Moses in Egypt. They were ready to go back and submit themselves as slaves. These people must have been massive to make you second guess if the Lord is still on your side and be willing to resubmit yourself back to slavery. They must have thought to contend with these people meant certain death, and just not to even try. The Lord has to speak from the tabernacle, rebuking Israel to keep them from returning to Egypt because of this faithless act and others. This was like the act that the Lord had had enough with the children of Israel, that the Lord promised they will wander in the desert for 40 years. The Lord tells Moses that almost everyone 20 years and older, except for a few houses like house of Caleb and Joshua and their families, are going to die over these 40 years. And they end up dying through one means or another, snake bites and breaking commandments of the Lord and different things. So the Lord couldn't work with this faithless generation. He had to wait until he could work with the next generation. So hundreds of thousands of Israelites die out during that 40-year period. Interestingly, seeing miracles doesn't build faith necessarily, because the next generation had more faith, and only some of them would have witnessed God's miracles performed by Moses at a very young age. So near the tail end of the 40 years of wandering in the desert, the first group of giants from King Og come out to fight Israel. And as they are getting ready to enter the promised land, the Israelites slaughter all of them. So we also read in Deuteronomy 2:19 through 22, prior to the Israelites' arrival, that the Lord destroyed some of the giants from before the descendants of Lot and Esau. So Esau's and Lot's descendants could go and inhabit that particular part of the land. So it makes you wonder, how did these giants get back on the earth after the flood? So the earliest record of giants appearing after the flood is in the book of Jubilees. And I'm not sure why the book of Jubilees was considered non-canonical. I suspect it is because they don't know the original author and because it mentions watchers. Both of those two things were certain to give it a non-canonical status. But it is considered canon among the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and among Ethiopian Jews. And it's quoted several times by early Christians. Now, in this setting, the flood has been over for several generations. And Noah's sons have started multiplying in the land to the point where they have just started to divide up the land for inheritances. However, as Noah's posterity starts to spread throughout the land, they come in contact with giants, watcher offspring, around the land of Canaan, same place they were before the flood. So the timeline of when this takes place is sometime after the flood, but before the Tower of Babel. So these giants start to kill some of Noah's descendants. Read the verses below in Jubilees 10:1 through 6. And in the third week of this Jubilee, the unclean demons began to lead astray the children of the sons of Noah, and to make to err and destroy them. And the sons of Noah came to Noah, their father, and they told him concerning the demons which were leading astray and binding and slaying his sons. And he prayed before the Lord his God, and said, God of the spirits of all flesh, who hath shown mercy unto me, and hast saved me and my sons from the waters of the flood, and hast not caused me to perish as thou didst the sons of perdition. For thy grace has been great towards me, and great has been thy mercy to my soul. Let thy grace be lift up upon my sons, and let not the wicked spirits rule over them, lest they should destroy them from the earth. But do thou bless me and my sons, that we may increase and multiply and replenish the earth. O thou knowest how thy watchers, the father of these spirits, acted in my day. And as for these spirits which are living, imprison them, and hold them fast in the place of condemnation, and let them not bring destruction on the sons of thy servant, my God, for these are malignant and created in order to destroy. And let them not rule over the spirits of the living, for thou alone canst exercise dominion over them. And let them not have power over the sons of the righteous from henceforth and forevermore. Now, I've bolded a few things in here to draw your attention, as it first mentions demons leading astray, then destroying and slaying the sons of Noah. Well, how can demons slay? They can't, at least not directly, unless they have a body, which in this case they did. They had giants. However, remember how the bodies of the direct offspring of the Watchers were possessed with demon spirits instead of spirits from heaven? Noah says the father of these spirits were the Watchers, and that these spirits are living. He's obviously speaking about the giants. He says these are malignant and only created in order to destroy. He asks that the evil demon spirits in the bodies of these giants rule not over the living spirits. In other words, to not rule over his posterity. So, side note, just if you're interested to understand the phrase "the sons of perdition" mentioned in verse 3, I understand that to mean the Watchers. My definitive understanding of a son of perdition is someone who has a pure knowledge of God. Most of us don't have that, hardly any. We live by faith. But then those that do, they transgress against him by slaying the innocent. So Cain, for example, that killed Abel, was a son of perdition. He knew the Lord and knew of his existence and still killed his brother. Judas knew Jesus Christ was the Son of God, but he betrayed Christ and had him killed. The Watchers slayed the innocent, and they also perverted religious practices, and their giant offspring killed people as well. And they did this all while having a full knowledge of God's existence. So Jubilees 10:8-9. And it says, "The chief of the spirits, Mastema, came and said, Lord, Creator, let some of them remain before me, and let them hearken to my voice, and do all that I shall say unto them. For if some of them are not left to me, I shall not be able to execute the power of my will on the sons of men. For these are for corruption and leading astray before my judgment, for great is the wickedness of the sons of men. And he said, Let the 10th part of them remain before him, and let 9 parts descend into the place of condemnation." So from these verses we gather from Noah's prayer that the Lord may end up wiping out all these Watcher offspring. But before this happens, a chief of the spirits comes to beg God to keep some of them. And you read here in verse 11 that the Lord decides he's going to wipe out 90% of them, but leave 10%. So who is this spirit that spoke with God? Verse 11 reveals that. "And we did according to all his words. All the malignant evil ones we bound in the place of condemnation, and a 10th part of them we left that they might be subject before Satan on the earth." Thus we see it was Satan that spoke with God. That shouldn't be hard for Christians to believe. In the Canonical Bible, we read about Satan meeting with the Lord to discuss Job's life. I believe the reason for such communications is that even though Satan is completely opposed to the Lord and wishes to destroy him, the Lord keeps Satan around because he does serve the Lord's purpose in some way. See, Satan tries and tempts people in the world, and people who choose not to follow God's adversary are vindicated to be worthy to receive the rewards God will place on them in this life and in the afterlife. Satan's ill will towards people actually helps people to develop their true eternal character, even a deep sense of love and respect for God. So it's just like Newton's second law of equal and opposite reaction. There needs to be opposition. The Lord later uses giants to try the faith of Israel. As they return with Moses into the Promised Land, it helped to show the true character of the Israelites. The first generation was faithless, and the second generation, about 40 years later, was faithful. So, how did the giants survive the flood? Again, the biblical record on this is silent, but from the book of Jubilees, we can gather that it was some of the Watcher offspring that survived. None of the Watchers did. I don't believe that account disagrees with what is said in 1 Peter 3:20, since that states that only 8 souls were saved because perhaps giants aren't considered souls, and perhaps these giants were not on the earth at the time the flood took place. Remember, the Lord's archangels bound the watchers, but not their offspring. Well, how could the giants temporarily leave the earth? There is one other writing that might give us some insight into what happened. Philo of Alexandria was a Jewish Greek philosopher that lived during the time of Christ. And he wrote the following, in Greek, of course, but been translated to English, and it says, "And when the angels of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, they took unto themselves wives, all of them whom they chose, those beings, souls hovering in air. And let no one suppose that what is here stated is a fable, for it is necessarily true that the universe must be filled with living things and all its parts." So souls hovering in air, were the watchers able to levitate, or did they arrive in a ship that was able to defy gravity? So remember, 200 of them showed up on Earth. Usually when we think of angels appearing on Earth, we don't hear of any ship for transport. I don't think they need one. But as we've established with Daniel's vision, a watcher is not an angel. Angels seem to have a duty or connection to this earth. Watchers in general are not supposed to be here on the earth. So perhaps the watchers did come in a ship, and that was able to hover in the air. It would be poetic if their own abominable offspring is what destroyed the watchers by not allowing them onto their aircraft. If that is true, this ship hasn't been found or is yet to be found. Or perhaps the answer is more simple. Maybe they had their own lifeboat, or they're amazing at floating. I don't know. I don't think it matters too much how they survived. We just know from the record of Jubilees and the Canonical Old Testament that some of these offspring did survive. So are there any giants alive today? I don't know. Goliath, who was with the Philistines, seems to be the last recorded giant. And I'm not even sure Goliath was a watcher offspring giant. The Josephus and Major Septuagint manuscripts all give it as 4 cubits and a span, which is 6 feet 9 inches tall. Goliath recorded around that size. Other records say that he is 9 feet tall. So I think it would kind of make a great story if Goliath was one of these last giants found that the Philistines got on their side to say, "Hey, look, we got one left, to bring it on, he's with us." But I think likely the truth is Goliath was just a really tall guy and not a watcher offspring. You can also now get an idea of where David found the faith to slay Goliath. His ancestors had done the same to much larger giants, and he believed he could do the same as well. Today we do hear of people who claim encounters with a Sasquatch. Listening to some of these testimonials is interesting to hear people say words like, "It looked just like a man, but bigger and with hair." I remember listening to another encounter a hunter claimed to have with a Sasquatch that chased him. When he was asked why he didn't shoot at it, he said, "It looked too much like a person. I couldn't." Why wouldn't he shoot something that's chasing him? Well, probably because he might think he'd be up for murder charges for killing an actual person. I don't know if these stories are false or true, but I don't think it would be completely crazy to think it's possible that a very small handful of these creatures might be hiding in the untouched frontiers of the world. Remember, these creations had trouble surviving because they would consume too many resources. They'd have to live distant, alone, or few in number, hiding where there would be enough resources to support them. Okay, so did the giants breed with other humans? So we read that these giants were possessed with evil spirits, but did they produce with other humans and create other offspring that were not possessed with devils? So the Bible and the apocryphal records don't seem to give an answer to this, but here's an odd verse about Noah, Old Testament, Genesis 6:9. It says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God." So that phrase, perfect in his generations, I don't think it means he was perfect. Only Christ is perfect, and to say he was a perfect and a just man sounds odd to say. They don't really clarify one another, but confuse. Wait, was he a perfect, or was he just? However, perfect in his generations, when you add that on, I can only think it means one of two things. Perhaps it means he was from a bloodline that never apostatized or drifted in their zeal towards God, which is possible. Noah was 9 generations from Adam, and there was names in there like Seth, Enoch, and Methuselah, and Lamech, and the priesthood authority may have never broke from Adam to him. But another meaning could mean that his bloodline was not corrupted by the breeding of watcher offspring with mankind, and was therefore one of the reasons he'd been chosen to repopulate the earth after the flood. So why does this story matter? So it's not just a cool story to tell around the campfire while they're passing around the ganja. No, there is actually a reason we need to know this strange part of our past. Now, I don't know why this is, but there are patterns in the past that seem to repeat themselves in the future. Just as the Watchers had corrupted the world prior to the flood, they will again return and corrupt mankind prior to the earth being burned at the second coming of the Savior. Although I don't believe it will last for as long, God has promised in the latter days he will hasten the time of his coming for his elect's sake. In other words, events in the latter days and before Christ's coming will be compressed, and things will happen very quickly. The world will seem so strange with these unprecedented events that happen so quickly. So, who prophesied about the Watcher's return? Well, Enoch did, and the Apostle Jude quoted him on it. So let's look at the book of Jude. Verse 3, it says, "Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that ye should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints. For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men, turning the grace of our God into lasciviousness, and denying the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how that the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believed not, the Canaanites and other unfaithful Israelites." So what's Jude speaking about in these verses? He's talking about men in the very distant past who brought a great condemnation upon them. He's saying he will bring this to our remembrance, or the saints at that time, their remembrance, because they once knew this, but at this point it is faded into an old fable. Why? I don't know. Perhaps certain apostates or scribes or wicked priests desired not to have the story anymore, to do away with it, or maybe it was just a hard story to believe and kind of got forgotten. Verse 6 lets us know full well who Jude is referring to. It says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains unto darkness, unto judgment of the great day." Who were the angels or supernatural alien beings that left their first estate? Yes, you guessed it, it was the Watchers. In verse 7 and 8, Jude goes on comparing the Watchers to other people such as Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 8, the filthy dreamers may be Canaanites he's referring to. It says, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, and set forth an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak of evil dignities." Later verses, Jude refers to Cain and Balaam and others. Why? Well, I think it is because he's drawing on similarities of their ideologies and practices to those that were practiced and taught by the Watchers. It may be actually that the Watchers were the first to have taught the practice of worshiping false gods through fornication and child sacrifice and other abhorrent acts, and that continued practice has gone on throughout in the Earth's history. Then verse 13, he comes back to the Watchers. He says, wandering stars to whom is reserved blackness of darkness forever. So how does this talk about Watchers? Well, stars don't really wander in the heavens. They're affixed. I mean, yeah, technically celestial bodies in space are all moving at a extremely rapid pace, but because of the vast distance from them to Earth, they seem affixed, and the night sky only changes over long periods of time. And they don't reserve themselves to darkness forever. A star can't physically just go reserve itself to darkness. I mean, okay, yes, it can implode over millions of years in a supernova to become a neutron star that emits no light, but Jude's not talking about the phenomenon of physics that occur over millions of years. So how do stars wander then? Perhaps if they are ships in the night sky reflecting light like a star, then they do wander, just as if you saw an airplane or a helicopter in the night. Watchers were the wandering stars whose condemnation put them in darkness, cut off from the light of Christ forever. Alright, on to verse 14. It says, Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with tens thousands of saints, to execute a judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches their ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These are the murmurers, complainers, walking after their own lusts, and their mouths speaking great swelling words, having men's persons in admiration because of advantage. So Jude is referencing Enoch. What did Enoch prophesy about? Well, obviously it was about the latter days, because he's talking about Christ coming with his 10,000s of saints to execute judgment. He will come to judge all those who are evil, but also those whose mouths speak great swelling words, having men's persons in admiration because of advantage. Who is that? So do extraterrestrial beings have an advantage over us? Well, if they can cross the universe or even our own galaxy to visit us, then yeah, I'd say they have a pretty extreme technological advantage over us. And would people admire them for this? Yeah, I think they would. In the old records, the Watchers seemed to want to be worshipped as gods. They taught mankind technology, they perverted religion, even though they were fully aware of Elohim and was in control of this planet and was their creator. As people today have moved Christ far from their hearts and thoughts, people will readily worship these beings when they arrive. Only those who have set a determination in their heart as to who their God is will not worship or admire these beings when they come. Let's look at what Enoch said that Jude was referencing to get a further understanding of the following. So the following is a translation of Enoch 1 through 8, 2 and 1, taken from R. H. Charles' 1917 translation of the Ethiopian text, with clarifications extracted from the AF Greek translation. It reads as follows. This is the word of the blessing of Enoch, how he blessed the elect and the righteous who were to exist in the time of trouble. Rejecting all the wicked and ungodly, Enoch, a righteous man who was with God, answered and spoke while his eyes were open, and while he saw a holy vision in the heavens. This the angels showed me. From them I heard all things and understood what I saw. That which will not take place in this generation, but in a generation which is to succeed at a distant period on account of the elect. Upon their account I spoke and conversed with him, who will go forth from this habitation, the holy and mighty one, the God of the world, who will hereafter tread upon Mount Sinai, appear with his host, and be manifested in strength of his power from heaven. All the watchers will be terrified, and those who are hiding in the all the ends of the earth will sing, and all the ends of the earth will be shaken and trembling, and great fear will seize the watchers unto the ends of the earth. Great fear and trembling shall seize them, even to the ends of the earth. The lofty mountains shall be troubled, and the exalted hills depressed, melting like honeycomb in the flame. The earth shall be immerged, and all things which are in it perish, while judgment shall come upon all, even upon all the righteous. But to them shall he give peace, he shall preserve the elect, and towards them exercise clemency. Then shall all belong to God be happy and blessed, and the splendor of the Godhead shall illuminate them. Behold, he comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon them, and destroy the wicked, and reprove all the carnal for everything which the sinful and ungodly have done and committed against him. So Enoch spoke of our generation, the generation at the time of the second coming. He said there would be watchers during this time, when Christ would appear in his glory. So, is it so hard to believe? I mean, do we not now have UFO sightings in the thousands? The Pentagon has released a statement a few years ago stating UFOs were a real thing, and they were certain they were not technology of another country. And for a while, even the Russian and U.S. governments kept things quiet between them because they were suspicious of each other's technological capabilities. But over time, they realized neither one was capable of this kind of technology, and they've even exchanged information about UFOs. There are documentaries out there that you can watch where military personnel talk about their missile silos becoming inoperable when these UFOs are in the area. An excellent documentary is on Amazon Prime called The Phenomenon. In that documentary, there is one event in the 90s that occurred in South Africa where several children saw a UFO and people coming out of the aircraft, with words stating it was a man, but also they stated it wasn't human. So something that's a man but also not human, what does that look like? Something that looks very much like us, but you can recognize that it's alien? All of these children are now adults, and none of them retract their stories. Are the watchers not doing what they had done before in the past? Are they not watching, observing, trying to figure out how they're going to run the place? So, question, is the Antichrist a watcher? So when Jude spoke of the watchers, he compared their sinful deeds with other nations. He also told the church to remember the words of the apostles who had touched upon the same subject. Let's read below. But, beloved, remember ye the words which were spoken before the apostles of our Lord Jesus Christ, how that they told you there should be mockers in the last time, who should walk after their own ungodly lust. These be they who separate themselves sensual, having not the Spirit. But ye, beloved, building up yourselves on your most holy faith, praying in the Holy Ghost. However, I can't think of any other apostle who spoke of the same subject. I'm certain we don't have all their writings, but there is one writing from Paul to church members in Thessaloniki about the Antichrist that comes in the latter days. So 2 Thessalonians 2:2-5 reads as follows. That ye be not soon shaken in mind or troubled, neither by spirit nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, that the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you I told you these things? So in this letter, Paul is reminding the saints in this area that the second coming of Christ will not happen until there is a falling away. The first falling away happened shortly after all the apostles died. There was a lack of authoritative priesthood leadership, and Christianity split into different sects over time, which went to war with one another. It continues to today as people as a whole become less and less interested in Christianity, and the general decline will continue, reaching its completion when the Antichrist comes and the people on the earth admire him and worship him. So let's look at some traits of the prophesied Antichrist that makes me think he will be a watcher. He will demand to be worshipped as a god, and will desecrate God's temple. The watchers wanted to be worshipped and cherished as gods. The Antichrist will as well, and as verse 4 above we read, he will desecrate God's temple. As to whether this temple is the temple in Jerusalem that the Jewish people will rebuild at a later date, or if it is some other temple, is not clear, but we should recognize it when it happens. Revelations 13:8 explains, those who have not chosen Christ as their God will worship the Antichrist. Number 2, he will be able to work signs and lying wonders. 2 Thessalonians 2:9 says, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. Number 3, he will speak blasphemies against the Most High. Just like the watchers of old who were well aware of Elohim, their God, and the God of the earth they were visiting, they spoke blasphemies against him, corrupting the pure religion. Revelations 13:6 says, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Number 4, he will have power to overcome the saints, at least temporarily. Both Daniel and John make it clear that this being will have power to overcome the saints, not permanently, of course, because we do read about him later being driven out by the house of Israel and then destroyed by Christ at his coming. However, there will be a time where he will have power to oppress the saints. To what extent and how long, I don't know. Hope to figure that out. I imagine the Lord allows this in order to happen in order to test his saints. In the end, those who vindicate themselves before the Lord will be privileged to dwell near to him in Mount Zion and receive all he has for his faithful children. Revelations 13:7, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. Daniel 8:24, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And 5, of course, he will be extremely powerful. So, the Lord has a plan for dealing with the watchers in the latter days, and when the watchers show the righteous don't need to fear, although they'll have much reason to fear since the Antichrist will be against them, the Lord has a plan for defeating these beings. Although they will be highly advanced when compared to us, they will be nothing compared to the Lord when he comes. Prophecy seems to indicate a 1-2 blow to the watchers. The second hit will be when Christ appears at the second coming with his resurrected beings and destroys all the wicked. The first blow will come from the lost 10 tribes of Israel, who return with power strong enough to drive back the Antichrist. If you haven't watched my presentation on the lost 10 tribes, then you'll want to, because if you don't, you'll be a little lost in this part that I talk about. So Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and John littered the Bible with many verses regarding the return of these people. John spoke about them raising an ensign and establishing a nation. Isaiah spoke about them as well, but in 13:5 he tells what they'll first do when they come back. He says, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, yea, even the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. And in the book of Joel 2:1 it says, blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong. There hath not been ever the like, neither shall it be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen so shall they run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array. Before their face the people shall be much pained, all faces shall gather blackness. They shall run like mighty men, they shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks. Neither shall one thrust another, they shall walk every one in his own path, and when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. And they shall run to and fro in the city, they shall run upon the wall, they shall climb up upon the houses, they shall enter in at the windows like a thief. The earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And the Lord shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great, and for he is strong that executeth his word. For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? So these lost 10 tribes of the house of Israel that are lost to mankind but not to God will return in a huge army. They will drive back the Antichrist, establish Zion, where the Lord will gather in the righteous from among the wicked nations. They'll work to establish a nation and the beginning of the kingdom of God, even Zion. If you haven't seen my presentation on Zion, watch that, as it will explain Zion being established in the latter days, and this is their mission. So these two kingdoms, the kingdom of the Antichrist and the kingdom of God, will coexist for some years on earth like polar opposites, but they will not coexist for too long. Only long enough for the Lord to accomplish his work of separating the wheat from the tares. So, conclusion. I believe God is the master of the universe, but I'd be willing to bet that there is 0.0001% of his creations who are just narcissists, just like the Watchers, beings that have a full knowledge of their Creator and still choose to live outside his commandments. I mean, we read about a war in heaven in the Bible and how Satan tried to take the Lord's glory from him. It is probably the inevitable result that happens when you create intelligent beings that you grant free will to. Some will make horrible decisions, but the Lord loves his creations and wants them to grow and learn, so he doesn't take choice away from them. I should probably add a note of caution here that I have no idea if all UFOs we see today are from Watchers. Perhaps the Lord does extend an invite to righteous extraterrestrials to visit us. I don't know. When you see crazy things that happen in the latter days, seek the Lord's guidance. Just don't shoot at the first UFO that shows up, okay? And if they are Watchers, you don't want to shoot them anyway. And if they're not Watchers, you still don't want to shoot them. So don't take a Watcher for your husband unless you want freakishly tall, crazy children. Even crazier than my kids. If you watch this presentation, I shouldn't have to explain these things. Okay? So on a more serious note, you've learned about aliens and sasquatches. I grew up in the 90s. Back then, I didn't really believe these things, and most people would have thought you were a little loony if you did. And I think the reason is because it's easy for us to discredit things when we can't make sense of them. Having the Bible and other scripture helps us to make sense of things, to know all truth, even the ancient truths that have become hidden and faded into fable. So I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to join my mailing list on my site, habitatforsurvival.com, if you like. I don't spam. In fact, I don't email enough because I got work to do, just like you, and I just send out good info and exciting news that I find from time to time. Hope you enjoyed. Sorry I didn't find a way to work, Groot here into the story. I am Atticus. I am not Groot. I love you. God bless.